within our RFP that we've launched, which I'm sure that most of you are aware of. The second challenge is what I already alluded to earlier as one of the drivers, but still remains as a challenge, is uniform policy. Again, I relate to the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, because resolution of this article could create a much broader interlinkage between national carbon markets and international carbon markets, which, as a consequence, even more important, it would mean convergence of policies globally, and which would allow the same playing field internationally, which is very important. Creating certainty around policies creates the ability and the field for investments to happen. Another important aspect that we need to tackle is the current lack in standardization of carbon offsets. The drive towards one dominant international carbon credit standard would be fantastic if it would be applied to one, if not all, jurisdictions globally. So for global adoption, we need to ensure that national policies are ready to allow carbon offsets to be used in their existing trading schemes or as a way for offsetting existing taxation. And that's a very important point. Otherwise, everything that we are trying to do in the upstream LNG value chain is not going to be really helpful from that matter. We need to complete the value chain. And with the above in mind, the need to develop the registry infrastructure, which is secure and reliable, and that facilitates legal transfer of title of carbon offsets, is also necessary. What I've already mentioned before, but I would like to repeat, is the link with the downstream and retail markets. We cannot just be solving part of the equation in our LNG trading world, but we need to link this and go beyond and link it to the carbon neutral aspects in regasification, transportation, and eventually combustion as well. And then I wanted to touch upon another aspect which can be a challenge, given that so many companies are suddenly moving into thinking about their sustainability strategies, is the skill sets of the labor that we face in our market. We will have to develop new skill sets well and quickly, which is going to be, to my opinion, quite a struggle, given that we need to change the mentality of people moving from oil and gas products to oil and gas products that have a sustainability project surrounded by it. However, it's not all clearly doom and gloom. The challenges are there, and we need to face them head on. But there's significant opportunities as well. The first companies that start thinking about sustainability around their businesses will have clearly an early mover advantage, and essentially are going to be able to form and shape the market together with the early movers. I also think that the notion that gas and LNG is the cleanest of the fossil fuels is a notion that is starting to dwindle in the public's mind. So it is our obligation, all as GIGNL members, and we have the opportunity to ensure that LNG and gas can position itself as the primary transition fuel by supporting the carbon neutral aspects around LNG. And obviously, last but not least, obviously creating demand for carbon neutral LNG will enable the sanctioning of new projects that produce carbon offsets, which is obviously helpful and necessary to reach our stringent and ambitious goals that many companies have set ourselves. So if we talk a little bit more into detail on what Pavilion is doing on this topic, and to transform essentially good words into real action, As you might be aware, we have launched earlier this year the first RFP with carbon neutral ambitions. So today I wanted to give you a little bit of a background on the drivers, why we decided to launch this, and why we decided to embark on this progressive initiative. So Pavilion Energy, firstly, is deeply committed to supplying natural gas and LNG to Singapore in a reliable and competitive manner, first and foremost. Secondly, it also we feel obliged to support Singapore's energy transition. And we therefore came to the decision that we need to prioritize strategies to decarbonize our own imports of natural gas into Singapore itself. Now, Singapore has been quite progressive as a government in setting itself ambitious targets, such as capping GHG emissions by 2030 and halving it by 2050. So to be able to meet these targets, Pavilion requires us and Singapore as well as Pavilion to look at emissions reduction outside of Singapore's borders and to the procurement value chain. Hence, why we've decided to launch this ambitious RFP, which will help us essentially achieve this. So one of the main characteristics within the RFP that we've launched is that we will discuss with the sellers a joint development of the methodology that's able to capture the footprint of an LNG cargo from well to discharge terminal. But the main output is that we will create essentially a statement of GHG emissions for every single cargo under this SPA. Essentially, it's equivalent to kind of a bill of lading, but then for the footprinting of that cargo itself, which in our view is the primary requirement to even be able to build a strategy around carbon neutrality. And we hope that we have a view that we would like to share these the findings that we do in this process and the principles that surround the methodology with the industry, so that it can ignite and speed up other players develop their sustainable strategies around natural gas. This RFP is also really, in our mind, a trigger to move from single cargo carbon offsetting to cargo offsetting within SPAs. This is quite new. I think there is a much more complexity that comes into play in allowing this and embedding this into an existing SPA. But we have to, and the market has shown that we have enough capabilities to adapt. So what we need to do is essentially design new commercial structures that allow for the usual buyer and seller flexibilities in LNG SPAs, but that allow also for the implications around the GHG methodology. Okay. Yeah, and to re-highlight our intention is that overall, after we've developed this methodology, we do want to be the driver in the market to internationalize this methodology so that everyone can benefit from that. So I wanted to essentially conclude today's discussion with sharing a graph from IPCC, essentially showing the uphill battle that society faces, not only our industry. It essentially shows the level of yearly reductions in CO2 mitigation that is necessary to remain within the 1.5-degree planet warming level. Now, when you see the numbers that we need to achieve, these are quite daunting and scary. However, this should not discourage us doing what is right. And hence, I see Pavilion, as well as every single member within the Gignal community, as the driver in the market to push change. And we do need to look at decarbonizing our existing strategies. So we feel that above all, before competing against each other, we should, as members, first and foremost fight for gas and LNG market share against coal resilience and promote the use of gas and LNG in new developments such as small-scale LNG businesses and bunkering business. And the way that uh, um, and the way that Pavilion wants to collaborate and promote carbon neutral LNG is twofold. One is to support carbon offset tradability, and secondly, as I already mentioned, is sharing further in due course with the industry and create a methodology workshop so we can share our lessons learned from this RFP process. So, in other words, Pavilion, we're open for business, and we're very keen to work together with many like-minded companies on this very exciting topic. We know that there's a lot of challenges ahead, but it's only through collaboration that we're gonna create those changes lasting and beneficial for the whole industry. So with that, Vincent, I would like to pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, Roger. I think it was a very, very compelling presentation, a very, very good overview of the challenges associated with measuring the greenhouse gas footprint of LNG. I particularly like what you said about the role of GIGNL members in that sense, and thank you very much for pioneering this work with other companies. Now let's turn to Shell and one of the two most expert people on the subject, Mehdi Chenoufi and Christophe. Mehdi, the floor is yours. If you can just turn on your camera.
Oops. Is it not on? Can you hear me, Vincent?
We can hear you, yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think we have 7 minutes, right? So let me go a bit faster. First, of course, thank you, GIGNL, you, Vincent, and everybody else for organizing this and joining. I wanted to express, of course, my deepest gratitude to those who took the risk of leading the way alongside Shell or other companies on nature-based carbon neutral LNG. It's really amazing what a group of passionate and trusting partners can do to drive, in my view, irreversible change. But I also wanted to make a plea, as Roger did, to this noble industry. For me, of course, it's not just about leaving a beautiful industry to this generation and next by being transparent on our Earth footprint, by of course avoiding pollution, reducing it, compensating and restoring. For me, it's also because I can't fail as a human being and look back thinking we did nothing. So I will leave it at that and hand over to science. And Mr. Christophe, to you. Thank you for listening. Christophe, the floor is yours.
Of course, I have to unmute. Thanks, Mehdi, and thanks, Vincent, for the invitation here. And as Mehdi said, I would like to give a little bit deeper insight into the greenhouse gas emissions along the LNG value chain. And as Roger already said, it is very important that we think about common methodology here to approach the challenge of carbon neutral LNG. And that means we need to understand what is the carbon footprint of LNG value chain, what are the emissions and how can we get to the emissions and how the emissions are distributed along the value chain. And this is something I would like to give you a little bit more insight from our point of view. And before I go into that detail, let me just, I can't move this slide. Can you bring back the slides, please, Vincent? So I couldn't move the slides.
Yes, we're working on it.
Or if you could just move it on. So as I said, the greenhouse gas value chain emissions are important to understand. And before I would go into the detail, I just would like to give you a short introduction into my team. And we have a team in Shell that looks into life cycle analysis, well-to-wheel analysis for all our products, projects, and operations in Shell, the so-called greenhouse gas intensity analysis team. And this team is a global team. We have 7 experts in 5 locations. And the team was set up to improve the quality and consistency of carbon footprint analysis and to be the non-biased center of expertise in Shell. So we are doing life cycle analysis based on science and are neutral on our results. And give you a little bit the areas of expertise we're working in is, for example, from the left top. So we do, as I said, LCA analysis of product pathways. Here's an example of different fuel pathways, and we looked at. We develop LCA methodologies. For example, we did that in the chemical sector in collaboration with BASF. This is a methodology we are now trying to get it through Plastic Europe into an industry standard approach. And we also are represented in industry bodies and consortia in LCA task force and life cycle analysis task force. We also contribute to the scientific debate around LCA with several scientific publications. Just to give you an overview on our activities, but now I would like to start to dig a little bit deeper in the carbon neutrality of products. And of course, if you do start that, we need to look at what standards are out there already. And for carbon neutrality of products, there are a couple of standards like the PAS 2060, the Carbon Neutral Protocol from 2020, National Carbon Offset Standard by the Australian government as well. And the whole standards, these standards say we need to consider the greenhouse gas emissions on a life cycle or well-to-wheel basis of the product, so the value chain emissions. And therefore, there are also standards available to follow a certain methodology, or it's more a framework rather than a recipe to follow. The ISO or Greenhouse Gas Protocol or PAS standards here. And they also say, and that's important, I come back to that later, we need to follow a conservative approach to avoid underestimation of greenhouse gas emissions, and data shall be reliable, relevant, and complete. These are important things to keep in mind if we talk about the greenhouse gas emission of the LNG value chain. And
Christophe?
Yes? Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but the slides are not moving at all. You're already.
They are not moving.
Oh. No. Next one.
Where are we now?
Slide. We just moved to slide 5. You want slide 5?
Is that here? Sorry. Does it work? Are we on slide 5?
Now you're on slide 5. Yes.
Okay. We haven't seen the other slides.
Nope.
Okay.
But it's okay. Don't worry.
Okay, so we go. No worries.
We have 5 minutes left. 2 minutes left.
Yeah. We go on. So because this is important that we look at that. So if you these are the standards, the carbon neutral standards here from the as I said, and they say life cycle well-to-wheel emissions are important. Conservative approach to avoid underestimation of greenhouse gases, and data shall be reliable, relevant, and complete. And we have standards for the life cycle here as well. So what I would like to show then is to look at the life cycle emission of the value chain. First of all, we need to go and see what do we understand of the as a LNG value chain here. What are the elements we looked at, for example, in the value chain for the emissions? And that's going from the upstream, the production of the natural gas pipe along the pipeline to a liquefaction plant, we have the LNG carrier, regasification, and the end user, in this case, a power plant here. And important to understand is how these value chain can be looked at. And we can see a well-to-gate approach here, or well-to-dissemination. And we have the gate-to-wire here as two parts. And how's the distribution of the emissions here? Then it is 25% of all the greenhouse gas emissions are in the well-to-gate part only, but the combustion of the LNG takes 75% of the whole greenhouse gas emissions. And if we speak about greenhouse gas emissions, what does it cover? So it covers, and I will come to the bubbles later, it covers carbon dioxide, it covered methane emissions. That's an important part here to look at in the LNG value chain, and N2O. This is the most important greenhouse gas emissions to look at in the chain. And you can see that the distribution along the different elements is also varies a little bit, that we have upstream and in the liquefaction plant higher greenhouse gas emissions than in the pipeline and shipping transport and in the regasification. Of course, the biggest chunk stays in the combustion here. And these greenhouse gas emissions, or also called CO2 equivalents, are very often referred to as Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions. And this is something that causes a lot of confusion in the discussion. So I would like to go back and just give a short introduction again, or a reminder again. What are we talking about if we talk about Scope 1, Scope 2 and 3 greenhouse gas emissions? And what we see here is we have a reporting company that's green, and we have upstream activities and downstream activities to this reporting companies. And all the greenhouse gas emissions coming directly from the reporting company are referred to as Scope 1 emissions. If we burn a fuel, that's Scope 1 emissions. Everything else on upstream, and that could be delivery of feedstocks and production of natural gas by a third party delivered to you, this is called the Scope 3 emission. Any electricity and steam you use in your process, like for the liquefaction, it's called as a Scope 2 emissions. So this is related, Scope 2 is related to energy that is delivered to you and producing of it, electricity, steam. Downstream activities like transportation or use of the sold products is also referred to as Scope 3 emissions. So what is important is we can have Scope 3 emissions upstream and downstream of our reporting company here. And how does that apply along the value chain? And let's see the supplier's view here, which might cover upstream pipeline, LNG, liquefaction and shipping. And you can here have, of course, Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions related to your activity. And if your natural gas would come from a third party, that could also cover Scope 3 emissions. Everything downstream to our customers and maybe the end users are Scope 3 emissions. If we would change the lens slightly to the customer view, given the customer is doing the regasification, then everything related to that is a customer Scope 1 and 2 emissions. Everything upstream is Scope 3, so the delivery. And the use of the product is also Scope 3 to the customer. If we change the lens a little bit further to kind of the end user view, then the combustion of the LNG is the Scope 1 emissions of the end user. Everything before is Scope 3 to the end user. If we would look at that together, we can clearly see here where we have overlaps of Scope 1 and Scope 2, Scope 1 and 2 and Scope 3 emissions, depending on the lens you are taking. So what does it mean for the LNG value chain? All the emissions all the greenhouse gas emissions for a carbon neutral LNG, we calculate for the full value chain, so on a full well-to-wheel or well-to-wire basis of this commodity. And very often it's a question, who can claim the offsets or can claim the carbon neutrality here? And as a discussion point here, in a voluntary market, as we calculated here, along the value chain, and we have overlapping scope 1 and scope 3 emissions, depending on the view. You can't avoid double counting anyways. So we could say 100% offsets could in principle claim, all the parties here could claim the 100% emission reduction. Let's go one step further here is on the data we need. And I said at the beginning, data should be reliable, relevant, and complete, and follow a conservative approach to avoid the underestimation of greenhouse gas emissions. We should go to reliable sources, which could be government or regulatory bodies, external recognized models and databases, and publications, and of course, internal calculation, which then should be audited. And everything, but this is important, also following the standards, needs to be calibrated and adjusted to regional specific typical values. Important also to understand this for the LNG is that upstream intensities for natural gas production can vary depending on the region and supply route, which we took here, for example, from a paper. What you see here on the y-axis is the gram CO2 equivalent per megajoule of natural gas produced. And what you see here on this axis is a cumulative natural gas supply. And each bar is one source of natural gas production. And you can see that it varies here from 5 grams CO2 per megajoule up to 42 grams CO2 per megajoule. And what is the difference? The difference is the yellow bar. This is a pipeline transportation, which has, in this specific case, a lot of methane emissions as a strong greenhouse gas. So you see a broad spread here, and that needs to be considered as well. Just to close that out here is to summarize again what we said is, for carbon neutral products, we should build on industry standards of carbon neutrality in life cycle and well-to-wheel emissions. It is important to ensure that we cover the relevant product value chain, greenhouse gas emissions, which mean CO2, but also methane and N2O. And it is important to use robust, relevant data and follow a conservative approach. What we said is, depending on the view, scope 1, 2, 3 emissions are overlapping for different parties. Which is also a very important thing to consider. In addition to that, and I will hand back to Mehdi here, is in addition to that, it is also important that we look at the offset project quality, and this is also relevant. And back to you, Mehdi, on that.
Yeah, thanks. We're overrunning.
Yes,
materially.
Sorry for that. Yeah.
Yeah, all I can add is indeed, I think it was raised by by everybody in the past. The hardest remains the selection of the projects, their likely impact on the different stakeholders, on the reputation, the relevance of the projects to the customers, the consumers, and more importantly, the co-benefits of every project on matters such as poverty alleviation, biodiversity, and the wider Earth primary ecosystem services. So from there to say that there will be a standard soon, I think we're a long way. That's all from us. Apologies for overrunning substantially. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mehdi, and no worries. We'll thank you, Christophe, also for this great overview. without delay, let's turn to Mr. Shimizu from Tokyo Gas. Shimizu-san, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Just a few seconds.
Go ahead.
シェアできてるのかな? Okay. So thank you for Vincent, and thank you for organizing this workshop despite of the COVID-19 crisis. I really appreciate the GIGNL's effort. And hello everyone on the web. My name is Seita Shimizu, and I'm responsible for marketing of CNL. So today I will make a short pitch regarding retail side of CNL. And my pitch will be proceeded on this manner. And first of all, I would touch on the outline of CNL. So please look at the image. First of all, as a first step, to originate a CNL, we need some environmental conservation projects, such as a forest project for originating CO2 credit. And after that, some sellers buy a purchase of CO2 credit, before import of LNG, the seller should execute carbon offsetting. This is very important process. If carbon offsetting is executed after import of LNG, this CNL have no difference from our conventional measures, such as using domestic CO2 credit. So after the execution of carbon offsetting, finally, energy utilities like Tokyo Gas will distribute CNL to the customer who is environmentally conscious. This is the outline. And through our activity, I would mention about our current situation of CNL in Japanese market. Our massive activity to penetrate CNL is less than 7 months or 8 months, or something like that. But we already have 3 clients, and 3 clients adopted CNL as a result of marketing efforts in 2019. So these are 3 customers. One is Baranochi building, Automotive Park building. This is a district heating and cool project. So the client, the purpose of client is to enhance the brand value of the DHC in the ESG context. And the second client, named Sakai Chemical, the purpose is a little bit different. Sakai Chemical Industry is one of the supply chain members of Shiseido. Shiseido is a very famous cosmetic company. So the driver for adopting CNL for the Sakai Chemical is to comply with Shiseido's ESG policy. So this is a case of to comply with the supply chain restriction regarding ESG or SDGs context. And the third client is just a hydrogen refueling station. To use CNL, the fuel cell vehicle is achieve real no CO2 emission vehicle. So I mean, this is a carbon offsetting tank to wheel. And I'd like to mention about the role of CNR to achieve net zero CO2 in Japan. Our effort is divided into two parts. One is electricity, and the other is mainly heat. And for electricity, it is the measure is very simple. It is to keep expanding use of renewable power sources. But the situation is a little bit different in the heat sector. So, of course, we promote development and innovation in essential core technologies that contribute to decarbonization, such as CCUS or hydrogen production and the use of methanation technology. But as you know, it takes a little bit time. So it is assumed that decarbonization measures in the heat sector will be difficult to achieve in the near term without carbon offset. So CNRA is most practical and most promising option at this moment. And contributed to the reduction of greenhouse gas on the global scale and create sustainable development benefits around the world. So again, at this moment, in the heat sector, the carbon offsetting measure is the most promising action. And the CNR is very promising in that context. And through our activity of our current marketing, through the current marketing activities, some issues are rising. The current issues and the challenges will be divided into 4 parts. The most important point is institutionalization. In other words, how to be effective in the Japanese carbon regulatory rules. So, but to achieve the regulatory effectiveness, before that, the enough market penetration is demanding. So the other issues, to solve the other issue is very important as a first step. So branding strategy development and media platform to gain more publicity of CNR. So now we are planning further promotion or advertising activities of CNR. And regarding pricing, this is very important. Some clients gave up adopting CNR because of its additional cost. So under liberalized market and the severe economic situation now in Japan, the willing to pay of B2B customer to CNR value is not so much. In other words, unfortunately, our customers is not ready for pay a lot of premium for the CNL. So at this moment, cost competitiveness is indispensable for the further penetration of CNL. Of course, while we keep enhancing and showing the value of CNL to the public. So it is assumed that CNL would be accepted by customer under the condition that its effectiveness exceeds that of other similar environmental value-added products. So please keep in mind, again, the price competitiveness among the carbon CO2 offset measures is very important. So, and finally, I will give you the audience some one message. For Tokyo Gas, the CNR of 1 cubic meter will be a force of good to make the world better. So we will keep on enhancing our marketing activities for the penetration of CNL, despite of the current severe situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shimizu-san. I think we all aim to make the world better. Now is time to figure out ways to do this. Let's now turn to Yan Zhu of CNOOC. And in the meantime, while Yan is preparing to take the floor, please think of asking questions in the chat box. You can use this box on the top of your screen to ask questions in writing, and we'll take them right after Yan's presentation. Yan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to talk briefly about the carbon neutral LNG in China. Please turn to slide 2. The slide 2 shows what CNOOC has done during the past times about carbon neutral LNG. Actually, altogether, we have bought 5 LNG cargoes, which are carbon neutralized. And these 5 cargoes will be delivered this year and also next year. And the suppliers are Shell and Total, our two of our long-term partners, among which quite a lot are from Shell. And also the first one is from Shell. And all these carbon neutral LNG, the greenhouse gas will be offset by the carbon credit. And these carbon credits are mainly verified VERs, which are credit from, I think, European market. It's not the Chinese carbon market. And for CNOOC, the aim to procure carbon neutral LNG is to explore this niche market. Frankly speaking, our first carbon neutral LNG cargo is bought from Shell. And for those carbon credit for this first cargo, Shell has participated in a Chinese carbon credit project, which is located in Qinghai and Xinjiang provinces. So for this carbon neutral LNG, we are not doing something which is environmental friendly. We are also helping the poor in China. So that's the initiative, the first initiative for CNOOC to do this carbon neutral LNG cargo. This is what we have done in the past. Please turn to the next slide. After we have bought these carbon neutral LNG cargoes from our partners, we try to market this carbon neutral LNG in China. As you may also have heard of Shanghai Petroleum and Natural Gas Exchange. It is a very big petroleum and natural gas exchange in China. We try to market quite a great amount of our LNG or natural gas through this exchange of platform. And also on the 1st of September this year, we offered the first deal of 2 carbon neutral LNG from Shell to be auctioned on this platform. And this carbon neutral LNG will be delivered to our customers all through the last quarter of 2020 and also the first quarter of 2021. You may also know that during this Q4 and the Q1, this is the winter season, which is the good season for gas customers to buy natural gas or LNG. So we found that these Chinese gas buyers are quite happy to bid for this carbon neutral LNG on the platform, on the exchange. But as far as we know that they are quite they like very much the LNG supply in winter, but the appetite for the carbon neutral gas or LNG is still yet to be explored. Just as our friend from Tokyo Gas just mentioned, actually these natural gas customers, they are willing to buy LNG to be supplied in winter, but they are not so happy to pay a premium for this carbon neutral. This is the result or the outcome for us to auction these first two cargoes. Please turn to the next slide. Also, take this chance, we have a brief look at our Chinese carbon trading scheme in China. Actually, in 2011, NDRC, a government institution in China, has approved to establish 7 regional pilot trading regions in China. They include 5 cities and 2 provinces. These 5 cities are quite famous and big cities in China, including Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Tianjin, and Chongqing. Yeah, and the 2 provinces are Guangdong and Hubei. And then in this 7 regional carbon market, the carbon credit are traded within each of these regions, and also the carbon allowance are traded, and also the CCERs we call, which is China Certificated Emission Reduction, and only these 2 products are traded within these regional pilot cities or provinces. This is the current situation. We also heard from the NDRC that actually they have a big plan to establish a national carbon trading market in China, but still due to other considerations, for example, the efficiency, the functionality, and other issues, such market, national market, is yet to be established. So this is the current situation in China, and also for this, for each of these regional carbon market, the local government has different policies. For example, for some market, they may only allow the carbon allowance or carbon credit to be produced from such region or such province or city, which can be traded or used as the carbon allowance. And for others, they may only allow a certain percentage of carbon which are created from other parts of China to be used as carbon allowance. So different local market, different local government has different policies regarding this carbon credit and carbon trading. This is the current situation in China. But none of these 7 regional markets could allow VERs as carbon credit or as carbon allowance for these gas users or these companies to use as their own carbon allowance. This is the current situation. So as a way to go forward, our view for the carbon neutral LNG is that we believe carbon neutral LNG is environmental friendly, of course, and this is an effort that we made to reflect the industry's efforts to curb this climate change. This is something good to do and good to know. But the cost of offsetting this carbon may compromise the affordability of LNG. Just as I said just now, the cost or the premium is still something we have to consider when we market this LNG, especially when we market LNG in the gas market. We have to compete this carbon neutral LNG with pipeline gas and domestic gas. So this is the other problem we have to consider. And the next one is regarding the carbon credit. As I just mentioned in the previous slide, we need something like tailored or customized carbon neutral LNG product for the Chinese end users to be bought and to be used in the particular gas market in China. In that case, I believe that carbon neutral LNG will be more popular in China, and more Chinese gas users would be happy to join with this carbon neutral LNG scheme. So that's all for what I want to share with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yan. You clearly highlighted the challenges associated with carbon neutral LNG also, and the need to maintain the competitiveness of LNG. I will now ask the presenters to turn on their cameras, if that's possible. Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe a first question that comes to mind, if I could ask also everyone to disable their microphones because there is some echo here. Yeah, maybe one first question that comes to mind is the impact of COVID-19 on carbon neutral LNG. How do you think the recession induced by COVID-19 could impact the major sustainability drivers and specifically the development of carbon neutral LNG? Maybe Roger, you want to take that question?
Yeah, let me go first on that. I think it's a good question, and I think it's relevant given the situation that we're in. One would logically think that it will have an impact somehow. However, I hope that is different and that it's not going to happen. And I'm confident that this time it's different. Reason being that to get out of a recession, you need to invest in the right sectors, and the sustainability sector is something that is that will give long-lasting benefits, and those can only be the ones that those sectors need to be prioritized, essentially. So whether I can give you a 100% guaranteed answer, that's probably not the case. I really hope that this time around, a recession is not going to stop our efforts to improve and create our industry more sustainable. And I think the examples that I've used at the very start of the presentation, showing that so many companies are starting to have very ambitious sustainability pledges, and they're continuing doing so, even knowing that COVID is impacting the market, is a good omen for it being different this time.
Okay, anyone else wants to comment on that point?
I can simply add that I think COVID probably helped, and the recession will help because you need to differentiate yourself even more, and this is something that is already available. So I still believe it will grow a lot faster during recessions, but that's a personal view.
And at the same time, Yan was highlighting the issue of the cost of the additional premium added to to the cost of LNG delivered to China in particular. How do we solve this issue of the costs? And do you think it can really be an obstacle for the development of carbon neutral LNG? If you look at the power sector, for instance, is there a future for carbon neutral LNG in such a sector?
Which sector? Sorry.
The power sector, for instance.
Power sector. Yeah. Actually, we believe that if the carbon neutral LNG, any premium added to this carbon neutral LNG, if we can pass on this premium to our customers, we will be fine. Yeah, so we will be happy to purchase carbon neutral LNG. So the problem is that such carbon credit has to be used as carbon allowance for these power plants, for example, gas-powered plants in their environmental protection scheme in China. I don't know whether I make it. Yeah. Actually, in China, there is also some requirement for these carbon emission companies. They have a certain quota each year that if they use more than this quota, they have to buy. So that's why we have several regional market. But for this quota or allowance, these are not VERs. This has to be carbon allowance or CCER. So they will be happy to pay for CCER, for example, but not VER. So if the carbon neutral LNG is carbon neutral by CCER, that would be much more better in our downstream marketing. So that's the problem. That's why in the last item I said that we need a tailored or customized carbon neutral LNG product for China. Yeah.
So if I understand you correctly, that's what you meant when you mentioned the specific requirements of Chinese customers and end users. So buying credits from the compliance market rather than from the voluntary market, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah, exactly. The compliance market. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Maybe I add on to that, if you don't mind. I think we need to look beyond just our own garden. If we really want to drive carbon neutrality within the LNG value chain, we need to expand our horizons a little bit. And what Yangan's essentially bringing up is a policy issue. Not an issue, but it's a policy aspect of making carbon neutral LNG globally adopted. Essentially, voluntary carbon offsets, if we have one standardized format that is applicable throughout most jurisdictions globally, will stimulate demand for carbon neutral LNG. Now, coming back a little bit maybe on the pricing aspect, which I understand that everyone can claim that it should be free. There is a cost to carbon neutrality, whether one likes it or not, whether it's through the acquisition or acquiring of the carbon offsets or improving and paying for the efficiencies in the value chain. But I want to look a little bit beyond just the imminent, but I foresee a market whereby LNG gets traded, carbon neutral LNG gets traded and is the norm. And hence, I see much more of a scenario whereby there is a differential where non-carbon neutral LNG will trade. Now, that differential can be positive or negative, most likely negative, I guess, but there'll be a penalization for non-carbon neutral LNG. And probably that's not going to be next year, clearly. But I foresee a future wherein that can happen. So that's where it's important to link it to the downstream users, because eventually that it needs to be linked to the downstream players as well. It can't be just something that gets done on the LNG trading side.
Thanks, Roger. Talking about the downstream players and the end users, Shimizu-san, what do you see specifically in Japan as the real drivers for adopting carbon neutral LNG? What are what really attracted your customers to carbon neutral LNG? Is it ESG requirements? Is it regulation?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for question. And as I mentioned before, in Japan, CNR, the adoption of CNR is just voluntary measure at this moment. In other words, it is not regulatory effective. But in the context of ESG or SDGs, a lot of companies commit to environmental consciousness and decarbonization society. So in such a context, CNR is one of the most promising measures to cope with such a customer demand. And even though the most of customers is not ready for pay a lot of premium to CNR, but I think to prevent further shrinkage of LNG market, this kind of measure is very important to keep on our activities of energy transition. So the main driver for the customer is not only the emotional issues such as ESGs or SDGs, but actually in the heat sector, to use natural gas is most cost effective and environmentally effective. So to keep the LNG market or natural gas market in Japan, to adopt this kind of measure such as CNR is very practical, I think.
Thank you, Shimizu-san. And Christophe, you touched on a very important topic, which is the risk of double counting of emissions and of overlapping of the different scopes, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, which is used for the reporting of emissions. And what would be your recommendation in that sense? What do you recommend as a supplier of LNG?
So what the key thing is here, that the scope 1 and scopes 2 and 3 emissions, as you said, they are overlapping depending on the lens you are putting on, either as a supplier, as a customer, or the end user here. What I would say is, if we are in a voluntary market here, not bound by regulations or mandatory market here, I would say all players in the value chain are enabling the greenhouse gas reduction by offsetting the emissions of the whole value chain. So you can't avoid, whenever it comes to scope 3 reporting, you can't avoid double counting. Yeah? So that's something, that's a technical situation we are in here. So we need to find a way how we can all participate, all parties participate in a way and claim for the greenhouse gas benefit we are enabling here as partners in the value chain. Does that answer your question?
I'm not sure I fully understood, sorry. We need to find a way, and what would be that way?
No, a way could be that we say, okay, we all partner here, so we acknowledge the double counting is there. So we are saying, okay, we are claiming for carbon neutral. We are claiming carbon neutral supplier. We supply carbon neutral. We are buying carbon neutral, and we're using carbon neutral LNG. Yeah.
And we take into account the full, of course,
the full life cycle,
the full life cycle,
because this is a requisite.
Yeah.
This is the basis for calling it carbon neutral, is to look at the full life cycle emissions here. Yeah, the full value chain emissions.
Okay. I don't see many questions coming into the chat box. It seems that you are so impressive that everybody is very shy to ask you any particular question. Maybe a very practical question to you, maybe, because everyone's wondering how does it work in practice. You've sold several carbon neutral cargoes to different Asian customers. In practice, how do you structure such a transaction? Do you include it as an appendix to the SPA? Do you draft a separate agreement? And what should we do in the future to incorporate carbon neutrality in the sales agreements for LNG?
Thanks, Vincent. You took another complex part, and we're running out of time. We have really two simple solutions. The first one is to bundle the LNG VERs into the LNG sales, but you still need a separate agreement to transfer the VERs, and you need a small MSA really linked to the VERs. So whichever way you want to look at it, you need a separate suite of agreements that are not very complicated, and depending on whether you transfer the certificates themselves, you may also need to have partners who are able to receive them through an exchange. So they have to be ready for it. But it's not very complex operation. It's just time consuming.
Okay, so from a contractual standpoint, it's not an obstacle, you would say.
No, not between the let's say the LNG value chain players, but of course, if Tokyo Gas or Sinopec sells the carbon neutral to Google or Microsoft in Tokyo or Shanghai, there is a bit more work, right? It gets more complicated as you go downstream. I think, as Roger said, there is a lot of work to do to democratize this all this, without making it regulatory, right? We could make it work with a lot of trust and a lot of policies and procedures. But it's possible. Otherwise, you can see it, Vincent. It will be driven by Google and everybody else.
Yes. And my follow-up question, Mehdi, would be what would it take for carbon neutral LNG to become an industry norm? And because I think it's desirable, and what could an association or an industry body like GIGNL do to support the uptake of such a practice?
Yeah, so I really benchmark what we're doing here with Shell's efforts in the Netherlands or the UK, the carbon neutral fuels in general, right? On a purely voluntary basis. And we can see that over quite a short period of time of less than a year, you get to 10-15% type of offtake. And I think GIGNL could bring the industry together and find a way to get everybody to contribute a share, right, from the upstream supplier to the shippers, etc., etc. And by cutting it into many smaller tranches, it will turn out less expensive to the consumer than it is today.
So, if I understand you correctly, helping democratize this on a larger scale.
Yeah, democratize or creating standards without turning it into a huge 500-page policy paper that the EU would write, like an
Liana,
industry
do you have any
initiative.
opinion on this? You need to unmute yourself. Anyone else want to say a word on this? Any additional comments?
Well, I think where Gignal's role can lie as well is into obviously promote uniform methodology, which is kind of linked to what was shared before. As Pavilion, we have no issue in sharing the findings of something that should be very unbiased and straightforward, which is essentially the life cycle of the value chain of the LNG cargo. And to promote trading and commercial structures to create it, one needs to share essentially, and I think that often gets better done by institutions that are not commercially driven, simply because of a trust matter. So that's why, from a Pavilion perspective, we have no issue in eventually having such a workshop where we involve everyone from the industry, including institutions like yours, simply because we think that that is what is necessary to get full adoption.
Yeah, I agree. You can drive transparency, Vincent, through GIGNL methodology and transparency. I agree with Roger.
And be proactive and not wait for regulation to come at us and impose standards or methodologies that would be detrimental to the development of the industry. Yes, we're very aware of that. I want to highlight that tomorrow the European Commission will publish its methane strategy, and we should know more about the intentions of the Commission in Europe to curb methane emissions in particular, with some potential implications for LNG, of course. Any additional comments from the presenters before we wrap up, or any question in writing from our audience? I'll remind you that this workshop will be accessible. It has been recorded and will be put at the disposal of the members. So we are approaching the end of the time that we had allocated. We're even over time. Apologies for that. I think we all agree that carbon neutral energy is now part and will be part of the industry's efforts to curb climate change, that there is a lot of work still to be done, a lot of cooperation needed, a lot of food for thought and action for the industry. I would like to thank you all for attending, and to thank in particular our speakers of today. And I want to remind you that we will be holding another workshop on September 30th. This one will be a bit more practical and really focused on offset standards. So we will be hosting representatives from Wood Mackenzie, from Carbon Limits, from Shell, also from South Pole and Vera. So please stay tuned and register for this workshop. We will be covering the solutions and the methods to quantify emissions, to benchmark emissions and certify them, the various greenhouse gas emission reduction projects, what kind of standards you can select, and what are the lessons learned from other industries. Thanks again for listening. Take care and see you soon.
Thank you, Vincent, and everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.